Inside the courtroom, my father-in-law stood with his shoulders squared, his voice carrying that particular authority wealthy men develop over decades of being believed without question. "Your Honor, she manipulated my son. Her name was added to that trust behind our backs. She has no legitimate claim to our family's assets. She's not entitled to a single penny." My pulse pounded in my ears. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded to keep them from shaking, watching him perform for the judge. Watching him rewrite history with such confidence that for a moment, I almost believed him myself. My husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, sat on their side of the courtroom. He wouldn't look at me. Hadn't looked at me in weeks. I watched him stare at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but at my face. They were erasing me. Publicly, legally, emotionally. Turning me into a villain in a story I'd never agreed to be part of. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and reading glasses perched on her nose, raised an eyebrow. She glanced at the documents in front of her, then looked up. "And who originally created this trust, Mr. Greystone?" The courtroom went quiet. My father-in-law's confident expression faltered. Just slightly. That question was about to change everything. "My name is Callie. I need to say that because for the past 4 years, I felt like I was disappearing. Like I was becoming less real, less visible, less important with every family dinner and business meeting and holiday gathering. I should have known from the moment I married into the Greystone family that I was a placeholder, not a person. That I was a temporary addition to their story, someone they'd tolerate until they found a reason, or the courage, to write me out completely. The first dinner with them should have told me everything. It was 2 weeks before the wedding, a formal affair at their estate. Crystal glasses, china so delicate you were afraid to touch it, and conversations that felt like tests I hadn't studied for. My future mother-in-law, Diane, barely acknowledged me. When she did speak to me, her voice was polite in that way that's actually cutting. Every compliment had a blade hidden inside it. "What a lovely dress. Very affordable looking. Marketing, how charming. So many people do that now." My fiancé, Blake, squeezed my hand under the table and told me later not to worry. "She's like that with everyone at first." But I knew better. She wasn't like that with everyone. Just with me. The Real warning came the weekend of our wedding. I was in the estate's kitchen, trying to help with last-minute preparations, when Diane cornered me. She stood in the doorway, blocking my exit, a glass of white wine in her hand and ice in her expression. "He should have married Victoria," she said. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just stating a fact, like she was commenting on the weather. Not some nobody with a sad little marketing job and a studio apartment. Victoria. The ex-girlfriend from Blake's college years. The one from the right family, with the right connections, who understood how people like the Greystones operated. I felt my chest tighten, but I managed to smile. Good thing he chose me then. She took a sip of wine. "We'll see how long that lasts." When I told Blake about it later, he brushed it off exactly the way I'd known he would. "That's just how she is. She'll warm up to you eventually." But I felt the first real crack in my foundation that day. The first hint that I'd married into a family that saw me as an intruder, not an addition. 6 months into the marriage, the Greystone family business started struggling. They owned a small real estate development company, and they'd made some bad investments. Properties sitting empty. Deals falling through. Cash flow problems mounting. I'd been working in marketing for 8 years by then. I knew branding, positioning, digital strategy. So I offered to help. Quietly, without making a big deal of it, I rebranded their entire real estate arm. New logo, new website, new social media presence. I created campaigns that actually reached buyers instead of sitting in print magazines no one read anymore. Within 3 months, properties started moving. The business stabilized. I also connected them with my CPA friend, who restructured their accounts and saved them from a significant tax penalty they hadn't even known they were facing. No one thanked me. Not directly. My father-in-law, Richard, just muttered one evening over dinner, "Guess you're not just a pretty face after all." That was it. That was my acknowledgement for saving his company from collapse. Blake smiled and squeezed my hand, like his father's backhanded comment was a compliment I should be grateful for. It was my idea to create the family trust. We were at dinner again, we were always at dinner with them, and Richard was complaining about asset protection and estate taxes. You need a proper trust structure, I said, to protect what you've built and minimize tax liability when assets transfer to the next generation. Richard looked at me like he'd forgotten I could speak. She's right, Blake's younger brother added. We should have done this years ago. So I drafted the initial structure. I'd taken business law in college and remembered enough to outline what they needed. Then I connected them with my former law professor, who specialized in estate planning. The whole family was present for the planning meetings. Richard, Diane, Blake, his brother, his sister. Everyone. When my professor asked about trustees, Blake spoke up without hesitation. We should include Callie. She's part of this family now. She's been running the marketing for our real estate division. Diane's face went cold. She didn't say anything. Just smiled that frozen smile I'd learned to recognize as her most dangerous expression. But the trust was established with my name on it. Co-trustee, alongside Blake, for the real estate division we were managing together. The trust documents were comprehensive. Pages of legal language outlining asset distribution, trustee responsibilities, amendment procedures. My professor made sure everything was airtight. Richard skimmed the documents and signed them. Don't worry, sweetheart, he said to me with a dismissive wave. No one actually reads all this stuff anyway. But I did. I read every page. I kept copies of everything, filed both digitally and in paper form. I'd learned to document things, growing up without money or connections. Documentation was the only power I had. The trust was notarized, filed with the county, and legally binding. I was named as co-trustee with full authority over the real estate division, which I'd essentially saved and was actively managing. It should have felt like acceptance. Like finally becoming a real part of the family. Instead, it felt like I'd just painted a target on my back. 6 months after the trust was established, a business magazine ran a feature on the Greystone family's remarkable turnaround. The article praised their innovative marketing approach and strategic repositioning in the market. I read it 3 times, looking for my name. It wasn't there. Not once. The entire rebranding campaign I'd created was credited to Blake's younger brother, whose fresh perspective and digital native thinking had apparently revolutionized the company. Blake's brother, who'd contributed exactly nothing to the rebrand. Who didn't know the difference between SEO and SEM. Who'd once asked me if Instagram was the same as Facebook. I showed the article to Blake. This is my work. Everything they're describing, I did all of this. He shrugged. Does it really matter who gets credit? The family's business is doing well. That's what's important. I stared at him, this man I'd married, and realized he'd never once defended me. Not to his mother, not to his father, not even in private conversations. I was a ghost in their story. Contributing everything, receiving nothing, not even acknowledgement of my existence. The moment that broke me came at Diane's 60th birthday. A lavish party at their estate, 200 guests, champagne flowing like water. Blake gave a speech. He talked about family legacy, about strength, about the people who'd built the Greystone name. I sat at our table, beaming, thinking this was finally it. Finally, Blake would acknowledge me publicly. Would tell everyone how I'd helped save the business, how I'd restructured the trust, how I was part of the family now. He raised his glass. To my mother, the real backbone of this family. Everything we have, we owe to her strength and wisdom. Everyone clapped. Diane glowed. Blake sat down beside me, satisfied with his speech. I sat in silence, my hands in my lap, my face frozen in a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'd been sitting right there, and he'd somehow not seen me at all. The family retreat was the final signal that I'd never truly be one of them. They planned it for a long weekend in Napa Valley, staying at some exclusive resort I'd never heard of. Blake mentioned it casually one evening. The guys are doing a weekend trip next month. Father-son bonding thing. That sounds nice, I replied, filing away the dates so I could make other plans. Then I saw the photos on Diane's social media. Not just the men. The wives were there too. Blake's brother's wife. His sister's husband. Everyone. Everyone except me. I texted Blake, "Are you embarrassed of me?" No response for 6 hours. When he finally replied, it was a single sentence. It was just a mix-up with the invites. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. They deliberately excluded me, and Blake had let it happen. Maybe he'd even encouraged it. I stumbled across the document by accident. Blake had left his laptop open, and I was looking for a file he'd asked me to send to his father. I clicked into his documents folder and saw it. Amended Trust, draft.pdf. My hands shook as I opened it. The document proposed removing me as co-trustee of the real estate division. It cited family restructuring and streamlining decision-making processes. Every family member's signature line was already filled in. Digital signatures, dated 2 weeks ago. My signature line was blank. They hadn't even told me this was being discussed. I took screenshots. Downloaded the file. Emailed it to myself. Then I closed the laptop and sat very still, processing what I'd just discovered. They were cutting me out. Erasing me from the trust I'd created. And they were doing it behind my back, probably planning to present me with a finished document and pressure me to sign. I confronted Blake that night. He was in bed, scrolling through his phone. "Did you know about the trust amendment?" He looked up, and I saw guilt flash across his face before he could hide it. "What amendment?" "Don't lie to me, Blake." "I saw the draft." "Why wasn't I told?" "Oh, that. It's just a draft, Callie. We were considering some changes. Nothing's final." "Changes that remove me from the trust?" "It's not personal. Dad thinks it makes more sense to have direct family members." "I am family. I'm your wife." He looked uncomfortable. "You're overreacting. It's just paperwork." Later that night, I heard him on the phone in his study. I stood in the hallway, recording everything on my phone. "She found it," Blake said. "I told you she'd find it." "She's too smart." "No, she's upset." "I don't know, Dad. Maybe we should have just presented it differently." My hands shook as I saved the recording. But I didn't confront him again. I just went to bed, and the next morning, I called a lawyer. My attorney's name was Patricia Simmons. She specialized in trust litigation and family law. I sat in her office and laid out everything: the trust documents, the draft amendment, the recording, my documentation of how I'd saved the business. Patricia listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, she looked up with an expression that was part sympathy, part professional focus. "They're trying to remove you from something you created. That's breach of fiduciary duty at minimum. Possibly fraud if they proceed without your knowledge or consent." "What do I do?" "We secure everything. Original trust documents, proof of your contributions, evidence of your role as co-trustee. We build a case so strong they can't dismiss it." I left her office with a plan. I filed copies of the original trust with her. I gathered years of emails showing my work on the business. I prepared for war. "If they want to fight," I told Patricia, "they picked the wrong wife." My only ally in the family was Blake's great-aunt Beth. She was Diane's estranged older sister, someone the family tolerated but didn't include in their inner circle. Beth called me one evening out of the blue. "I heard about the trust situation. Can we talk?" We met for coffee at a place far from the Greystones' usual haunts. Beth was in her 70s, sharp-eyed and direct. "My sister tried to do the same thing to me 30 years ago," she said. "Write me out of family assets after I'd helped build them. That's why we don't speak anymore." I didn't know that. Nobody does. The Greystones are good at rewriting history. She slid a manila folder across the table. "But I keep records. Always have." Inside were documents my mother-in-law had kept as backup, emails, financial records, proof of my contributions to the business. Things I didn't even know existed. "She saved these?" I asked, stunned. Before she became Richard's wife, she was careful. Strategic. She knew to protect herself. Beth smiled grimly. She just forgot other women could learn to do the same. The next family dinner was 2 weeks later. Mandatory attendance, according to Diane's text message that read more like a summons than an invitation. I went. I smiled. I made small talk. And when Diane raised her glass for a toast, I met her eyes directly. To knowing your place in a legacy you didn't build, Diane said, looking at me. The table went quiet. Blake shifted uncomfortably. His father smirked. I raised my glass. Some legacies are built with silence. Some are built with receipts. Diane's smile froze. What's that supposed to mean? It means documentation matters. Contribution matters. Truth matters. I took a sip of wine and set down my glass. The rest of dinner was tense and silent, but I felt something shift. Power, maybe. Or just the certainty that I was done being erased. Blake tried to scare me into backing down. He cornered me in our bedroom after the dinner, his face flushed with anger I'd never seen before. You're forcing my hand, Callie. If you don't back down from this trust thing, I'll file for divorce. I'll take everything. I looked at him calmly. Make sure you do it before discovery starts. I'd hate for the judge to see how you forged that last amendment. His face went pale. I didn't forge anything. The digital signatures are time-stamped. The draft was created before the meeting where everyone supposedly agreed. The metadata tells a story your lawyers won't like. Patricia had taught me to look at file properties. Every document has a creation date, modification history, author information. Blake's draft amendment had been created 3 weeks before the family meeting where they supposedly discussed it. He'd lied to his own family, and I could prove it. Then I found the text messages. Blake left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and a notification lit up the screen. Can't wait to see you this weekend. Miss you. V. Victoria. The ex-girlfriend his mother had always wanted him to marry. I opened his messages. Months of conversations. Nothing explicitly physical, but the emotional affair was blatant. Plans to meet up. Complaints about me. Her telling him he'd married the wrong person. Him agreeing. I forwarded everything to my email. Screenshots, timestamps, the entire thread. Then I sent it all to Patricia. Turns out I was the placeholder after all, I wrote in the email subject line. Patricia called me within the hour. This strengthens your divorce case significantly. Infidelity plus the trust manipulation? We're in a good position. The depositions began 3 months later. Richard sat across from Patricia, confident and dismissive, explaining how I'd had no real role in establishing the trust. Patricia let him talk. Let him dig his hole deeper. Then she pulled out the emails. Mr. Greystone, can you explain these email chains from your account to your estate attorney, where you discuss Callie's trust structure recommendations? Richard's smirk faltered. That's just a phrase. She made suggestions, but... And these draft files, with her name as the primary author? The notarized documents listing her as co-trustee? The business records showing her as the point person for all real estate marketing operations? He had no good answers. Just deflections and excuses that sounded weaker with each question. By the end of his deposition, Richard looked 10 years older. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that I'd been documenting everything all along. The Real bomb came from Beth. She delivered it personally to Patricia's office, a manila envelope containing documents I'd never seen. Inside was an unfiled amendment to the trust. One that Diane had tried to push through 2 years ago, before I'd even known to look for such things. It removed me retroactively, backdating signatures, attempting to erase me from the trust as if I'd never been named at all. It was legally fraudulent. Every signature was forged, every date was false, every certification was manufactured. Where did you get this? Patricia asked Beth. Diane's private safe. I still have the key from when our mother died. She never changed the combination. Patricia added it to our evidence file. The court admitted it, and suddenly, the case wasn't just about removing me from the trust. It was about a pattern of fraud and deception. We were back in the courtroom. The same scene from the beginning, but now everyone knew the context. Everyone understood what Richard had tried to do. The judge, looking stern now, repeated her question. Let me ask one last time, who established this trust and its initial beneficiaries? I stood up. My legs were steady now. My voice was clear. That would be me, Your Honor. I drafted the initial structure, connected the family with the estate attorney, and was named as co-trustee in the original documents. I have the timestamps and metadata to prove it. Patricia handed the judge a USB drive containing everything: file creation dates, email chains, financial records showing my work saving the business, even the recording of Blake admitting they'd tried to hide the amendment from me. Richard's face went red. Diane stood up and walked out of the courtroom. Blake stared at his hands. The judge took the USB drive and looked at the Greystone family attorney. I'll review this. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. That evening, Blake's lawyer called Patricia. They wanted to settle. Avoid trial. Make this go away quietly. Richard was livid, according to Blake's lawyer. Diane had stopped speaking to anyone. The family was fracturing under the weight of their own deception. Patricia and I met to discuss the offer. It was generous, a buyout of my share, a gag order, a quiet exit from the family. What do you want to do? Patricia asked. I thought about it for maybe 5 seconds. No. No. They don't get to erase me. They don't get to buy me off. They don't get to lie their way out of this. We go to trial. Patricia smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Patricia filed additional claims: breach of fiduciary duty, attempted fraud, mismanagement of trust assets. She presented evidence that Richard had been using trust funds for personal expenses, commingling family and business money, violating his duties as trustee. The judge granted a motion to freeze all family assets pending the trial outcome. No one could touch the trust money, the business accounts, or any property held under the trust structure. Blake called me, furious. You've frozen everything. Dad can't even pay the mortgage on the estate. This is insane. No, I replied calmly. What's insane is trying to steal from someone who saved your family's business. What's insane is forging amendments and hiding documents. I didn't ruin everything, Blake. I preserved what you tried to burn. He hung up. We didn't speak again until the trial. The trial lasted 3 days. Patricia presented our case methodically: my role in creating the trust, my contributions to the business, the forged amendments, the attempted backdating, the pattern of excluding and dismissing me while using my work. Richard testified. Diane testified. Blake testified. All of them tried to minimize my role, to frame me as opportunistic, to claim I'd manipulated my way into the trust. But Patricia had documents. Timestamps. Recordings. Email chains. Witness testimony from Beth and from my former law professor who'd helped establish the trust. On the final day, the judge delivered her ruling. I find in favor of the plaintiff. Ms. Callie Greystone's name will be restored to full co-trustee status. The amended documents submitted by the defendants are void due to fraudulent execution. Mr. Richard Greystone is fined $15,000 for attempted fraud and misuse of trust assets. Mrs. Diane Greystone is found to have engaged in fraudulent conduct. Mr. Blake Greystone is removed as co-trustee due to breach of fiduciary duty. The courtroom was silent. It's poetic, really, I whispered to Patricia. They tried to cut me out of something I built. Now they're the ones locked out. I filed for divorce the next day. Clean, straightforward, no fault in the paperwork, but everyone knew the real reasons. Blake tried to contest it at first. Then his lawyer explained how the text messages with Victoria, combined with the trust fraud, would play in court. He signed the papers without further argument. I walked out of the courthouse alone. Blake tried to talk to me on the steps, called my name, reached for my arm. I walked past him without a word. There was nothing left to say. Nothing he could offer that would undo 4 years of being erased, dismissed, and betrayed. He'd made his choices. I'd made mine. The divorce finalized 6 months later. I kept my share of the trust, plus additional assets due to the fraud findings. The real estate division I'd saved was partly mine now, legally and permanently. I bought a house. Not a mansion like the Greystone estate, but a real home. Small, comfortable, mine. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, with no one's approval needed but my own. I launched a foundation in my maiden name. The Callie Morrison Foundation, focused on supporting women in financial abuse situations. Women who'd been erased from family businesses, written out of trusts, dismissed and devalued by people who'd promised to love them. I knew exactly how they felt. And I wanted them to know they weren't alone. A year after the trial, I sat in my home office, reviewing applications for foundation grants. Outside my window, the garden I'd planted was blooming. Real growth, visible progress, something I'd created with my own hands. The Greystone family hadn't contacted me since the divorce finalized. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that the business was struggling again, that Richard had stepped down, that Blake had moved to another state. I felt nothing about it. No satisfaction, no vindication, no curiosity. They were strangers now, people from a chapter of my life that had closed completely. My phone buzzed. An email from a woman asking for help navigating a trust dispute with her in-laws. She'd read about my case in a legal journal and wanted advice. I wrote back immediately. Document everything. Keep your receipts. And never let anyone convince you that your contributions don't matter. They tried to write me out of their story. So I wrote a better one. One where I was the author, the protagonist, and the victor. One where my name stayed exactly where it belonged, visible, permanent, and earned. My name is Callie. And I'm not a placeholder. I never was.